Hello, welcome to Endemic Times. My name is Mira, and there have been some new revelations coming out today of June 27th of 2022, in addition to the last couple of weeks when it comes to the Uvalde shooting. So let's get into it. A mother of two from Uvalde, Texas, named Anjali Rose Gomez, who bravely rushed into Robb Elementary on May 24th to save her children, claims she is now being watched by Uvalde police. On the day of the tragic shooting that killed 19 children and two teachers, Gomez made her way to Robb Elementary only to find that officers had not yet engaged the shooter, who was still inside with a classroom full of children. Right away, as I parked, a U.S. Marshal started coming toward my car, saying that I wasn't allowed to be there, she said. And he said, "Well, we're going to have to arrest you because you're being very uncooperative." So, as Gomez became more critical of the law enforcement response that was going on in front of the school, that was when she was put in handcuffs, only to then be released after a local officer asked the U.S. Marshal to uncuff her. As soon as the police took her out of those handcuffs, she said that she had a little getaway because she was so small and she could just run. Gomez hopped a fence and ran towards the school to locate her son's classroom. After finding and evacuating him and his classmates, Gomez then set her sights on her other son. Following Gomez getting her first son out and evacuating that classroom and then going on to try to get her other son out, that was when the police had begun to engage with her again, and she demanded that they start evacuating the classrooms. And eventually, Gomez's other son, along with his classmates, were able to get evacuated safely. Gomez claims that she has been watched by local police who want her to stop speaking out against the department and their response to the May 24 shooting. According to People, Gomez said she received a call from the department threatening her with a parole violation for obstruction of justice. She went on to say, "The other night we were exercising and we had a cop parked at the corner, like flickering us with headlights." The Uvalde mother also claims that she has had to separate from her children so they don't feel constantly watched by local law enforcement. So there's two parts of this. The first part is the fact that these police are basically stalking this woman and putting fear into her so that she doesn't speak out. This is extremely retaliatory in part of the Uvalde Police Department. The second part of this is that she's now having to separate from her children in order to keep them safe and away from police. These are things that just do not compute. The other thing is that this is the kind of response that you get from someone or people that know that they have made a mistake, a serious, egregious mistake that they know is wrong, and they don't want her to be talking about it. So the fact that they are stalking this woman, monitoring her to where she's now having to leave her children, these are things that should not be happening, and they're not wanting to be held accountable. And that's exactly what's happening here with the Uvalde police and Chief Arredondo as well. So since my last video regarding the Uvalde Police Department, state and local officials have spent weeks trying to reconcile incomplete and at times conflicting reports on the shooting and the questionable police response. And while multiple investigations remain ongoing, including one being conducted by the U.S. Department of Justice, some critical facts remain elusive following one of the deadliest school shootings in the nation's history. Stephen McGraw, the Texas Department of Public Safety director, is the one that is conducting the investigation into the Uvalde shooting and the failed police response. And it is through his investigation that he has found a lot of inconsistencies from the timeline and just the overall events that we have been provided from the Uvalde police. Things like not having enough protective equipment, radios not working, not having shields and guns, having keys but not having keys, and having a door locked but that's not really locked. These are all of the things that Stephen McGraw and his team have been looking into, and they have found that the updated timeline of events that he said was based on video surveillance and police communications characterized by the police response as an abject failure and offered what he appeared to be the most complete account of what occurred during the deadly rampage. And this is crucial because we have continued to get such conflicting reports and information when it comes to the Uvalde police and their overall response. So this is a bit of a summary, just kind of quickly, of what they have found in that report when it comes to this failed response. That there were enough officers and equipment on the scene within 3 minutes to neutralize the 18-year-old shooter. The door to the classroom containing the gunman might have been unlocked all along, even as officers waited more than an hour to find a key that would open it. And that's one of the areas that we've had very conflicting reports. At first, it was that the door was locked. Then it was they didn't have a key. Then it was they did have keys, and Arredondo claims that he used over 20 keys to try to open the door. And all of that seems to have been complete false accounting by the Uvalde Police Department. As we're seeing here, the door may very well have been completely unlocked for the entirety of this shootout. Begging the question again, what the hell were these officers doing, and how can these failures just continue to pile up and pile up? And another thing to note is that we've been told that they didn't have any protective gear in some of the earlier reportings, but now it is showing that they did have protective gear. They had the ability to open the door with a specific kind of wrench, and they also had a shield, which was one of the biggest things that was conflicting in reports, and also why they're saying that they didn't go in initially, saying they don't have protective gear and they didn't want to put the officers' lives at stake. But they did have a shield that they could have very well have lined a few other officers behind that and done what they needed to do. 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds. That's how long the children waited and the teachers waited in rooms 111 and 112 to be rescued. And while they waited, the on-scene commander waited for radios and rifles. Then he waited for shields. Then he waited for SWAT. Lastly, he waited for a key that was never needed. McGraw said officers had difficulty communicating because their radios had no reception inside the building, which contributed to a leadership vacuum that crippled the police response. And McGraw also called Arredondo the only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering the classrooms and killing the gunman. And as previously reported here, there was a huge issue with their radios that were not working, and it was the U.S. Marshals and Border Patrol agents. Their radios were working at the scene and also inside the school. And why they didn't have operating radios in their school district for the exact response that they needed and this team that they had is quite baffling. So following this investigation, Pete Arredondo has been put on administrative leave, which took a lot longer than a lot of people wanted because so much of this evidence is glaringly obvious that Pete Arredondo was such a huge part of this massive failure of epic proportions. And so at the very least right now, he is on administrative leave. However, people are calling for him to resign from his position. So in my last video talking about Uvalde, I did talk about Officer Ruiz, who was the police officer who works in the Uvalde School District specifically for this school. And it was his wife that called him saying that she was shot. And he then went to the scene because he was trying to save her life as well as her students. And Ruiz was among the 18 officers who had rushed over to his wife's school. He was ready to charge in with a few of his fellow law enforcement officers, battle the 18-year-old rifleman who had invaded the campus, and hopefully save his wife and her students. But just like Miss Gomez, Ruiz's fellow officers didn't back him up when he began advancing toward Morales' classroom door. They stopped him, stripped him of his service gun, and made him leave the campus. So what we have here is that instead of doing their job, instead of saving these kids and these teachers' lives, they held back an officer that was willing to do the job, that was willing to put his life on the line to save his wife and to save her students. Just like Miss Gomez. This is such a devastatingly horrific showing of how many people will go along with orders that they know are not right, but they're just doing it to save face, to keep their job, go with the status quo. And that is what allowed 19 children and 2 teachers to die. If that's your job, get a different job. A timeline that the committee pieced together in part by officers' body-worn camera footage and radio transmissions showed that there were 11 officers positioned outside 2 classrooms under attack within 7 minutes of the first 911 call about the intrusion. At least 2 of the officers had rifles, providing a force that was adequate to mount an assault against the intruder in an attempt to rescue those he was terrorizing. As we continue to move forward in this, it's really important for us to keep note that there have been so many inconsistencies by the Uvalde Police Department and by Chief Arredondo. Chief Arredondo isn't really answering any more questions. Neither is his attorney. They're not really wanting to cooperate any further with this investigation, which just kind of says a lot about the entire thing. And another aspect of this failure comes not the day of the shooting, but before the events that came before this, and how this shooter was operating both on social media and with private messaging, and what people knew and what they were trying to divulge to either social media apps or to police themselves. And this is another area where it's glaringly obvious of the massive fault on so many fronts that occurred and that led to this devastating event. In the weeks leading up to last month's elementary school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, the 18-year-old gunman made a number of disturbing comments to users on various social media platforms, leading the head of Texas's law enforcement agency to say last week that those comments should have been reported. Some of the online users who communicated with the gunman previously told ABC News that they did try to report him, yet their efforts largely went nowhere, and that regardless of how many times he was reported, he would still come back. He referenced school shooting, alluded to possible upcoming incident, and shared pictures and videos of guns. One user told ABC News that leaders of panels and live chats on the social media app Yubo would ban Ramos after he would come into the live groups where the user said Ramos would threaten other people that he would shoot up their schools. And then another user told ABC News that he would kick Ramos out of live panels he was hosting after Ramos would enter and make concerning comments. The reporting function on the platform, he added, barely works. And a spokesperson for Yubo, when asked by ABC News earlier this month to confirm if Ramos's account had been flagged, said that at this stage, we're not legally able to release any specific user information outside of direct requests from law enforcement. It's just so convenient and coincidental that things like this, that when it comes to every aspect of this case, when it comes to the police, their activities or lack thereof, their investigations or lack thereof, and their impetus to take the necessary steps to stop this killer or lack thereof, we're seeing there's just so many levels of failures upon failures upon failures. The revelations about Ramos's online behavior leading up to the shooting have sparked questions about the efforts of social media companies to monitor their platforms for warning signs in an era of rising online hate. Steve McGraw, whose agency is leading one of the probes into the massacre, said that he was disappointed in the social media industry for not being more proactive. But we also don't know how proactive or non-proactive these social media platforms are if they can't provide to us any level of transparency when it comes to the extent of their monitoring systems and what, if any, they have reported to law enforcement. It's obvious here that the police are definitely trying to cover up a lot of their failures. It's the extent of those failures that we're yet to really fully understand and see. We may even never know. Ramos also allegedly communicated with users on Facebook and Instagram, although that hasn't been determined that there were any efforts to report him on those platforms. A young teen did say that she had received a private message from Ramos the morning of the shooting, and she asked herself, what if I could have changed the outcome? And then another teen who asked to be referred to as Cece allegedly received messages from Ramos saying that he shot his grandmother in the head and that he was going to go shoot up the elementary school right now. There's always going to be a level of guilt from people that feel like they could have done something more than what they did. The focus here, though, should really be on the Uvalde Police Department. They are the reason why this happened, why the loss of life was so large, and they really demonstrate how our police departments are not functioning the way that they should be. Another piece that did come out in the last week or so is that the school district has decided to tear down Robb Elementary School because they don't want any other teacher or student to have to go back to that school. The one thing, though, to keep in mind is they are acting very quickly to bring the school down. And it's one of those things where we just want to make sure that we have as much transparency as possible. We want to make sure that all surveillance has been acquired so that the investigations that are going forward can have all of that information. Because it's really easy to throw things under the rug, tear a building down and just kind of act like nothing happened. But this was a really serious thing. There was a huge loss of life. There were so many families affected by this. The real better question here is whether or not children and teachers are going to ever feel safe and comfortable in Uvalde again, because this was such a failure by the police department to keep their community safe. So thank you very much for watching. I'm going to continue to get as much information of the Uvalde shooting, its investigation, and the people involved as the days and months move forward. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. Stay safe, take care, and remember to be kind to each other.